I hate pills. Hello guys, welcome back to the channel. I am so sorry I sound like this. I won't sound like this for the rest of the video. I just have to last minute re-record this intro because the one I previously recorded is no longer relevant. For close friends of mine who have been, following me while I create this video, they would know that I had a completely different intro for this video, and I decided that it doesn't really fit the new concept of it now. I intended for this video to come out in either June or July of this year, but because of many reasons, this video is now coming out at this point in time. As you see, it is out. I won't say a specific month in case it takes me even longer to finish this video than I planned. This video hurt to make is what I'm trying to say. So yeah, I've been hardcore struggling to get this video out. It's taken me so long. But I'm finally near the very end of it now, so I am redoing the intro. So The Sweet Life on Deck is a TV show that I am deeply fascinated with and have an intense love for. A lot of this video is me going through the journey of trying to discover why I have such a fascination with The Sweet Life on Deck, because I don't know how much cultural relevance it really has in our modern day, but I can't help but just adore it. The concept of this video is so old that I originally started watching The Sweet Life on Deck with intent of making a video about it while season 2 of Euphoria was airing. Season 2 of Euphoria was airing, and I was using The Sweet Life on Deck as a sort of palate cleanser for my life because that season was a lot to deal with. And I personally love to overanalyze things that people usually don't give a lot of time or effort into. Specifically, I love to talk about Disney Channel TV shows and movies in depth and, give a lot of time and effort to them that I think they deserve, because even though they weren't made for, the high class of society, these shows impacted millions of people, and they actually do have a lot of interesting things within them, and I think it's worth analyzing at the end of the day. Also because, like I said, as I watched the show and then later went back and watched The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody to get context for certain things, I realized that I really like this show. And I just desperately wanted to figure out what it was that made me enjoy this show so much as a grown-ass adult. And what I didn't notice about it as a kid, as many people do. I just hope you guys will be able to understand and appreciate my analysis. So yeah, let's deep dive into The Sweet Life on Deck and go to a previous version of me who didn't really understand why I liked the show yet and has their full voice. See you on the other side. Originally, I wasn't going to talk about The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody at all, because I was more interested in talking about the characters of Zack and Cody Martin, rather than just listing off a bunch of key moments of the series in order for 5 hours straight. Not that there's anything wrong with that, it's just not something I'm interested in doing. The characters of Zack and Cody develop more beyond their archetypes as they get older, which makes sense for plenty of reasons we'll describe later. So while I do like the original series, I just don't find it as interesting as On Deck. However, it would be silly to outright ignore The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody and skip over to the Tween Years saga and miss out on all the context. So let's just do a brief overview of the original series this spin-off comes from. And just for context, from here forward, I'll be using the name The Sweet Life to refer to the original series, and On Deck when talking about the spin-off. Or I'll just use the term The Sweet Life series when I'm referring to both shows. So The Sweet Life revolves around the day-to-day antics that go on in the Tipton Hotel, which is being managed by Mary and Moseby, who mainly serves as the straight man to all of these silly antics that the rest of the cast gets up to. The other main characters include Zack and Cody Martin, who live in the hotel with their mother Cody Martin, who is a lounge singer for the hotel. Zack and Cody are around 11 to 12 years old when the show starts. Other workers for the hotel include Esteban Julio Ricardo Montoya de la Rosa Ramirez, the bellhop, Arwen Houchazer, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, the maintenance man, and Maddie Fitzpatrick, the candy and magazine saleswoman in the front lobby. London Tipton is the daughter of Mr. Tipton, who owns the hotel, and she lives in a suite and slowly becomes friends with the people working there. Something interesting to note early on in this show is the workplace dynamic it inhabits, as well as the class differences between the people working in the hotel versus the people who stay there. There's very clearly a power imbalance between London and her later on friends, who are the workers for the hotel. There are constant jokes where an ensemble cast is formed, and at the end of the day, they have to kind of bow to what London says. It's always her word over theirs, even though they're all supposed to be on equal playing field, especially since so many of the main characters are actually grown adults, yet they have to, like I said, bow to the whim of this 15-year-old girl. Early on, Maddie and London become friends, and they start to hang out regularly. And the fact that Maddie technically works for London is something that does not fall on deaf ears for the show. There are plenty of episodes where Maddie, along with the other workers, are placed alongside London in storylines where it's clear that they're on different playing fields. And while there are many a joke that makes fun of the fact that London is ignorant and rich and wealthy, this definitely develops into a much more interesting and unique dynamic as time goes on. And by interesting and unique, I mean she becomes as smart as a bag of rocks, which I am definitely okay with. I have nothing wrong with that, but it is definitely what happens to her character. A lot of The Sweet Life is a workplace sitcom at the end of the day, with the majority of the show being about the antics the cast of characters get up to while they're there. In season 1 especially, the school lives of the younger characters only really pertains to the show as that they become involved with the Tipton itself, and very, very rarely does the show ever leave its walls. It functions a lot more like a traditional sitcom you would see on any network, unlike the specific tone and style that the Disney Channel would adapt over time with its programming. The evolution of the Sweet Life series is a perfect example of this, with the original show being a lot more family-oriented, and the spin-off show being much more centered towards tweens and teenagers. It's clear by the time On Deck started who the main audience the Disney Channel had accrued were. It makes plenty of sense, since the network had not yet discovered what its biggest moneymaker would be over time, which was female-driven musical projects that could sell CDs and concert tickets outside of the show itself. I mean, both High School Musical and Hannah Montana would both debut the same year that season 1 of The Sweet Life was airing. And I think that's the reason why I'm so fascinated with this series as a whole. It's because of what it represents at the end of the day. It's a perfect example of the slow evolution a show makes once it realizes what its audience is. I think the reason why The Sweet Life was allowed to stay on air is because, well, the actors wanted to come back for it, and also it probably tested well with girls, which let it fit on programming next to Wizards Waverly Place and Sunny with a Chance. It shows the shift from family-oriented content to kids-only programming, which reflects the shifting tides of television as a whole. Older shows also made by Disney, like Boy Meets World, would go through a similar evolution as the actors got older, since as time went on, American families went from only having one centralized TV in the house to all having their own individual TVs. Same goes for the internet. Like I said earlier, that's probably why I prefer On Deck to The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, not only because of my age, but because the narrative shifted to being more for children and less for the whole family. That does have its disadvantages, like how jokes can become simplified and how adult characters can become just these buffoons, because the writers know no real adults will be watching, so they don't actually have to put time and effort into those characters anymore. And in general, writers can feel more inclined to not try as hard. But on the other side of things, I think On Deck just has less filler episodes, since once they got the character dynamics going, they could keep up the drama between most episodes, whereas in The Sweet Life, they utilized episodic formats to a nauseating degree. Disney Channel realizing that its viewers actually like serialized storylines was the best thing to happen to On Deck, in my opinion, and all Disney Channel shows from around this time. On Deck is also able to avoid the trappings of pairing the same group of characters up together and never differentiating from that. Most of the time on The Sweet Life, you'll have Maddie and London together, and then you'll have Zack and Cody facing off against Moseby. And only during ensemble episodes is that dynamic broken. I guess what I'm just trying to say is that there's not as many unique interactions as you would hope for. Something I noticed in the early seasons is how Zack often seems to take priority in the narrative over Cody. The two are pretty much never seen in separate stories and exclusively do stuff together, but when they are separated to give their own story plotlines, Zack is almost always given the more important storyline versus Cody, which usually does silly B-plot stuff. Especially in season 1, that's the case. I think what really ended up happening is that the writers just thought of more stuff to do with Zack, and as the show went on, they eventually realized that there was this sort of disparity, and so then they slowly course corrected and gave Cody his own stuff to do. But early on, if you only were watching the first few seasons, you'd be like, why is Cody not doing anything ever? And I also wonder the same thing. I understand that the main hook of the show is the adorable twin brothers with opposite personalities getting into silly antics, but some filler episodes could really use a shift in the dynamics to make them more interesting. Something I will say for the early episodes is that they do treat the two siblings more fairly when it comes to their antics. As the show goes on to On Deck, Cody becomes a martyr for good and proper behavior, and Zack always gets pegged as this troublemaker who can only do wrong. But early on, the two are seen as being on the same level of mischief and causing wrongdoing. I guess Flanderization can cause a shift like that to happen over time. The series does like to toy with the idea of Cody being much more capable of causing trouble because of his smarts, but because he's a loser, he doesn't really bother to, and the narrative only occasionally takes advantage of this concept. But at this part of the show, that's pretty much all Zack and Cody are capable of. Again, this is something that On Deck just does 20 times better, which is why I like that show better, but I think I've said that enough already. I was surprised to see that Maddie and London are a lot more prominent in the show than I remembered. I guess it's easy to remember the twins more clearly since the show is named after them, but more often than not, Maddie and London take on the A-plots, while Zack and Cody mostly do stuff in the B-plots. Which shouldn't really be the case, but that's what ends up happening. Actually, the more that I think about it, the more I realize that Maddie and London are the real main characters of the show over Zack and Cody. I mean, the pilot episode opens up with the two of them becoming friends, not Zack and Cody moving into the Tipton or anything like that. The show opens and revolves around their friendship developing and growing over time, all while Zack and Cody just do stuff in the corner. Their relationship occupies just as much time as the twins, and that is what I find very interesting. I don't think it's a bad thing. London is one of the best Disney Channel characters of all time, but it sure is interesting to see that. I just have to assume that the writers weren't able to think of stuff for the twins to do while they were so young, and also they were trying to avoid a lot of twin stereotypes, like having them swap places every episode. So they just found themselves being more interested in the Maddie and London dynamic, even though it seems that they should be more of side characters like Carrie or Arwen and Esteban, but they're not. Early on, London really does have a lot more going on for her other than just being vain and not that bright. I could argue that she's one of the most flanderized characters in all of TV history. I kinda skipped around seasons when watching the show, so going from a season 1 episode to a season 3 one really highlights this the most. You can even see how Brenda Song is playing the character so differently not even a year later. She's an amazing actress, and if anyone can sell London Tipton, it's Brenda Song, but I just find the concentration of her character to be very intense over a short period of time. Early on, London and Maddie have a sort of odd couple dynamic, where they end up teaching each other things that they normally would be ignorant to. The pilot episode does a good job of setting this up. We see London teach Maddie how to get a boy, and we see Maddie teach London how to do well in school. This is something they end up doing pretty much throughout the entire series. It's very Laverne and Shirley, which I won't complain about because I love that show. I actually feel like Maddie gets a little tiring over time, mainly since she's always complaining about the silly antics that go on. Maddie being the straight man in their dynamic usually means she'll have to scold London on things, but since she's the same age as London, it causes Maddie to do that scolding through kind of being an asshole herself. I see how it's a good thing because they both learn how to be better friends to each other, not just London learning things, but since Maddie's character definitely isn't as funny as London's, it causes her to be a little bit exhausting. I don't want it to seem like I hate Maddie or anything, but for someone who gets into a lot of sitcom antics, she really does complain a lot. However, I really do like Maddie and how authentic she is as a person. Her poor upbringing causes her to be tough and hardened by the world, which may lend her to put herself over others, which manifests in some really cool moments throughout the show. Although not that often, because the show does, in fact, put silly antics as a priority over drama, which I have no problem with. Another awkward story element that I want to cover is the relationship of Zack and Maddie. Early on, it's established that Zack has a pretty big crush on Maddie. There's an entire episode in season 1 that's dedicated to this notion, and even though I can tell the writers meant well, the execution is still a bit awkward. Zack's intense crush on Maddie manifests in runner jokes and plot grievances that in hindsight caused me to close my eyes in shame. Jokes like this don't really age well, and I think might be a big contributing factor as to why I prefer On Deck. But the Sweet Life series as a whole has plenty of these, so that's not the best excuse. However, this specific story element makes me so uncomfortable that I think it contributes to more of my disdain than, say, the cultural appropriation. Trust me, we'll get there. That sounds bad and out of context. The specific episode that made me spit out my drink in horror was season 1 episode 8, A Prom Story. Maddie joins the prom committee even though she's a freshman so she can impress a senior she has a crush on. She confides with Carrie about the clear age gap between the two, and Zack, who has already been established as being in love with her, thinks she's talking about him. The episode does a meticulous job of showing what age gaps look like between teens, and how even though it's a completely normal thing to go through, it's not something that should ever manifest into a real relationship, because of the obvious. But then the episode ends on this eerily hopeful tone for Zack that almost promotes the idea that Zack may actually have a chance with Maddie in the future, and I just personally do not agree with that at all. The shot of them dancing at the end together just really highlights how they are not meant to ever be romantically involved at all. It just looks so weird. I think this segment is a good one to transition us into actually talking about On Deck, because this plotline does have its conclusion in an episode of On Deck. Maddie is one of the characters to guest star on season 1 episode 13, Maddie on Deck. She does a lot of the same things she did in the original series, which is complain about things not going her way, but at the end Zack comes to her rescue and they share a kiss. I was taken aback by this moment when I first watched it, but mainly since I hadn't seen The Sweet Life in many years, I wasn't quite aware of the detailed history of Zack and Maddie's relationship yet. After becoming aware of it, I pretty much threw myself off a building out of embarrassment for the writers. I think this moment speaks for itself, so I shouldn't have to add any commentary to it, so all I'll say is that Maddie is now the same age as the senior she had a crush on in that original episode that explored their relationship, and Zack is now the age she was in that moment. And I'd say that senior in high school had a much better reaction to her infatuation than she did with Zack's.
Thanks for helping with the prom. You did a great job, kid.
Just uncomfortable all around. Genuinely uncomfortable. And on that note, let's swiftly move on to talking about something else. Please. Yay, we're finally talking about The Sweet Life on Deck. While The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody mainly focused on the workers maintaining the Tipton Hotel, over time involving more high school elements of the show, On Deck transitions into a full-fleshed high school sitcom, without a few hitches in its evolution, to be fair. Most of Season 1 shies away from the high school elements it would later go full throttle on by Season 2, mainly because it seems like the writers might have been more used to writing episodes of Zack and Cody and hadn't quite adapted to the new concept and format yet. Something I can appreciate from the series as a whole is that it loved to maintain continuity and bring back older characters as callbacks. Characters like Arwen, Esteban, Maddie, Carrie would all make cameo appearances, along with those twin sisters and Bob and Barbara. Newest additions to the cast would of course be Bailey, Pickett, Woody, Fink, and later on, Marcus Little. These characters would be roommates for London, Cody, and Zack respectively. A good question some may be asking right now is, why was On Deck even a spin-off to begin with? I understand continuing the show even as the actors get older, since they wanted to keep doing it, but I think the real reason why they made On Deck is pretty simple. The money of it all. I'm pretty sure actors can pledge for a better wage and renegotiate contracts as the show goes on for longer, since more season orders indicate that the show is popular and actors would clearly want a higher wage. But if Disney Channel makes a brand new show and just happens to hire all the same staff, the contracts would list starting wages like they would for a brand new series, which I can only assume is a lot lower than a long-running series wages would be. Plus, a lot of things had changed since The Sweet Life went on. Ashley Tisdale specifically had starred in High School Musical and was the voice actor in Phineas and Ferb. So slowly writing her off would be weird, and it definitely did cause some awkward moments within the show where she wasn't available. So creating a new show where she doesn't have to be involved was probably a good move. Another big shifting thing is the involvement of Zack and Cody's mother, Carrie. Something you'll notice about a lot of teen media as time went on is that they didn't really involve learning life lessons anymore and became more about the antics of the main cast. So most of the time the parents are only tangentially related to the series unless it's a family sitcom, which I think especially on Disney Channel was starting to not be as prevalent anymore. I mean, yeah, you had Good Luck Charlie, but that's pretty much the only one out of them all. So somehow writing off Carrie would not work at all, especially if they were still staying with her at the Tipton. So having Zack and Cody move to live on the SS Tipton was a great excuse to have their moms still be in their lives off screen, but never actually interfering with their fun and teaching them lessons like she did in the original show. Mr. Moseby and their teacher Miss Tutweiller would be there to dole out punishment, but at this point they're at the phase of their life where they have to learn things the hard way, so I think it was a very smart transition. Because you know how it is, the stubbornness of teenagers can cause some awkward fighting with their parents, which does not translate well on screen, so removing the parents entirely is a very smart move. The Suite Life on Deck followed life on the SS Tipton, a luxury cruise with the School at Sea program the main characters attended, called 7 Seas High. Over time, the Suite Life series did evolve to be more serialized in its storytelling, and On Deck takes full advantage of that. Mainly by giving new dynamics added to the show room to breathe and develop over multiple episodes, instead of establishing everything in the first episode and rolling with it. It's nice to see the elements that would become key staples of the show slowly be dueled out over time instead of automatically just dropped on you like they're lore dumping or something. A good example is Zack and Cody's jobs. In Season 1, Episode 5, Zack spends all the money their mom sent them for the entire semester in the span of a few days. So now they must work at the smoothie bar and as a towel boy for the rest of the series to pay off their debts and afford food and stuff. This gives them a good excuse to be on the Sky Deck more often, which is the main set for the show, since normally they would just be going to school and then their dorms if it wasn't for their jobs. Plus provide some fun continuous costumes. Along with the lighting, it'll be easier to tell at what point in the day they're at, based on what outfits they're wearing. Like, you know it's after school if Zack and Cody are wearing their uniforms, and you know it's before school if they're on the Sky Deck still in their everyday clothes. Miss Tutweiller is the only teacher we see for their schooling, so we have to assume it's a relatively small school program on the boat. I mean, there's only around 15 extras in any single class scene, and when you see them graduate, they have a pretty small class of like 20 people, so it has to be a very small program. I have to assume it's also pretty expensive. I mean, we hear that the only reason why Zack and Cody were able to afford the School at Sea program is because Carrie got a Tipton worker discount. That's why it does feel like the characters are more developed and thought through when you see where they're from and how they ended up on the boat. Like, for example, Maya, who I haven't mentioned yet because I have a lot to say about her later, when she gets introduced to the show as a new character, we see her working as a waitress along with Zack, so we can assume that she comes from pretty humble backgrounds. And also characters like Woody, where it's clear that his family have basically just thrown him to the side to start anew. A constant running joke with Woody is that his stepfather is becoming more and more involved in his life, and he's just not okay with it. So you can really see the details of that being played out in the show. There's a lot of detailed elements that, the writers really kept up and maintained while they wrote the show. It's actually pretty funny how Season 1 sets up a lot of interesting character dynamics that pretty much go untouched until the final season, mainly since the writers probably had many ideas for the show and only bothered to pay off the storylines once they were done with the wacky adventures. Which I guess isn't bad, it's just something interesting to note. Like in Season 1, we get an episode where Miss Tutweiller and Mr. Moseby might have romantic interest in one another, but that doesn't even get, brought up again until midway through Season 3. This was clearly an idea that they had, but they put it on the back burner until they had time for it. Or maybe they just waited until they had the right means to tell the story properly, but either way, again, interesting to note. I'd say my favorite seasons are Season 2 and 3, since they take the ridiculous and surreal elements of the show and crank them up to 11. There's a few filler episodes worth skipping, but some of them are just so ridiculous that I'd recommend you watch them anyways. Episodes like the fairy tale one, where they just recreate famous Grimm's Brothers fairy tales with irreverent humor and shitty costumes, is a personal favorite of mine. That episode has really no reason to exist at all, and it looks like shit, yet I can't help to just be in love with it. I think what it is that I just really care deeply about the characters in this show. Like, they could be doing anything and I would still be interested because I like Zack and Cody and Bailey and Woody and London. Like, they're just great to be around. A lot of the time, the surreal elements of the show are held back by its budget. I mean, if any show should have a good budget, it should be Zack and Cody, which is literally in like its 5th and 6th season. Yet for some reason, everything looks just extremely low budget. Like, they could have made the fairy tale episode work with the low budget that they had. Hell, the costumes are so bad, it really does look like a high school play with zero budget. So they could have played it off as it being like a high school play or something. But they decided to make it dreams that all the characters are having while they fall asleep in class, which renders the point of the episode in the first place meaningless. I feel like they could have done something really kind of quirky and meta with it, like they're performing a school play, but they're performing it like to the camera, so it feels like you're watching them in the audience. That would have been a really cool element, but I understand a lot of these shows are really written on a time crunch, so ideas like that don't get to get tossed around. On the surface, a lot of these episodes seem like they're pretty useless, but I would say that their premises become fun bottle episodes instead. I'd say what separates a bottle episode from a filler episode is point and execution. Usually a bottle episode feels like the writers had an idea to put the characters in a fun and unique situation, like, what if the cast of On Deck were hosts on a news show? And they interact with this concept in the only way that these characters can, which makes it interesting. Versus something like the Inventions episode, where it seems like the writers just needed to write another episode that day and couldn't think of anything, so they just threw something together about how London's father wanted to come up with a new product to sell. So not only does it not make any sense, but it's also really unfunny, which is the worst thing a show like this can be. Oh, and the movie. Can we just please not talk about the movie? The movie actively does nothing to forward the story and actually contradicts a lot of what we already know about the series. Like I said in my previous Disney video on Max Russo, I was watching the Wizards of Waverly podcast, and they said on there that the people that worked on the DCOMs were a completely separate group than the people that worked on the TV shows. And that the Wizards of Waverly Place movie was so different from the actual continuity of the show that they asked the showrunner to come in and redo the script because everything was off about it. That is what the Sweet Life movie is. It feels like some random fan fiction that was written by somebody who's completely separated from the show, and then they just made because they needed to make a movie, and they didn't really care about fixing any of the continuity errors. So, just don't watch the movie. You're not gonna miss anything, trust me. Maybe watch Mr. Nostalgia's video on it if you want to know what happens, because I don't think it's worth the time. If you really want to hear my thoughts on it, then wait until I finish my ranking every Disney Channel original movie video to come out, which will probably be a long time from now. I guess that gives you the incentive to subscribe. Oh god. Ugh. The movie aired right before the finale, so it just ruins everything. It makes everything bad. The movie does nothing but make the story worse, so we're just gonna ignore the movie. It doesn't exist, okay? While making this video, I've actually talked with a few people who say that they like this movie and think that it's really good, despite all of its flaws, but personally, I can't bring myself to feel the same way. I'm sorry. But speaking of stuff that I don't think is very good, this is the most awkward part of the video that's gonna go by the quickest, mainly because I'm not the most equipped person to talk about this subject, but I do feel it's important to talk about when discussing the show as a whole. I feel like since the show mainly occupies a distant memory in plenty of people's minds, the fine details seem to become blurred into a hazy, pleasant memory, especially if the fine details are problematic elements that the average child would not be able to recognize. So for example, the average Zack and Cody watcher may be able to remember the episode where the gang went to Sweden and learned about the Martins' heritage, but will forget the fact that every Swedish person happened to sound like this.
Zack, I snook away from my father. I wish there was some way we could be together.
There will be, as soon as I clear my family's name.
And the entire B-plot is about how frustrating IKEA is. I don't know, did Mr. Moseby and Marcus Little really need to go to Sweden and have an IKEA B-plot? I feel like that could have been done at any point of the show, and it's just like in bad taste in my opinion. Pretty much every non-American land the show represents is portrayed in the most stereotypical and absurd way possible, with cheap Halloween costumes and sound stages, possible offensive accents, and possible harmful stereotypes. For a show where the entire premise is that the students of Seven Seas High are learning about the world by actually visiting the places instead of just reading about them in textbooks, the show seems to only do a poor job in properly representing the places they're supposed to be visiting and learning about. But see, I am also an uncultured American like most of the Seven Seas High students. Now that I think about it, they really underutilized the aspect of anyone from around the world could be on this boat, so you could have had a more diverse cast, but besides the point, I guess. So I personally can't speak exactly on how offensive all of this is. I would love to open the floor up to the people who are actually aware of the cultures depicted in this show and inform on what was in good and bad taste. Because since even from my limited perspective, I can tell that a lot of this was not good. I want to give the writers the benefit of the doubt, but in all honesty, it's most likely just laziness and biting off more than they can chew with a premise like this. I just know the Disney Channel isn't giving its TV writers on-location research to all the places they're representing, and for the most part are just throwing them a Cultures of the World book and telling them to try their best and that the script needs to be done by Monday. I don't know, that excuse just doesn't seem to pass the smell test for me. These are grown adults here. Try to have a little bit of, taste. The true saving grace of this show is the characters and how they develop over time, since those aspects of the show don't require the writers to go so far outside their depth of field. So maybe we should do like the show and focus on those aspects more going forwards. But I hope the clips I provide throughout this video can provide the knowledge that this is a problem that never really goes away and is hard to turn away from. I think a good character to start with is London Tipton, since she's the titular heiress that we all know and love. By the time On Deck starts, all of the characters from the previous show have already come fully formed and concentrated, so seeing the new characters arrive and slowly enter that same character decay over time is very funny. A lot of London's attributes from the beginning of The Sweet Life have faded over time, which we've already talked about, so I won't emphasize it too much. Just know that she never gets a real serious moment in the show ever again. I think maybe one, but that's not saying much. My favorite element of the show that becomes very apparent is that the SS Tipton seems to only have been built as a way for London to finally finish her schooling. In the first episode, it's clear that the only reason Moseby has this job is to be London's parental figure, and that the only reason why London is here is so she can't call a limo or jet off to different parts of the world instead of attending classes. They've literally dropped her in the middle of the ocean so she can graduate high school. It's really funny and an absurd element of the show that I really enjoy. Of course, in the first episode, she does attempt to jet off the boat onto a random island, but eventually she's brought back and has to be roommates with Bailey. Also, by the time On Deck starts, she definitely should have been done with high school by then. I think it's easy to forget that London was 15 at the start of The Sweet Life all the way back in 2005. So by the time On Deck starts, she's already supposed to be over 18 years old, and is well over 22 by the time the show finally wraps up. This makes all the times where she's seen in quasi-relationships with Zack really creepy in hindsight. Or like when Marcus has a crush on her and they actually debate whether that romance would be legit or not. It wouldn't, because she's a grown-up. I feel like stuff like this happens quite often in sitcoms actually, where the writers lose perspective on the context of their characters and involve them in weird situations because of that. Like in iCarly, Spencer gets placed on the same playing field and level as his little sister's teenage friends, and that just gets awkward over time. Something that always made me upset was the element of the SS Tipton being torn down while the students were trying to graduate. Like, yeah, it did contribute to a satisfying moment of Moseby quitting and telling off Mr. Tipton so the kids can graduate, but why was the boat being torn down so immediately? It makes more sense now that it's clear the boat was only really made so his daughter could graduate high school, so now that she's gotten all her credentials, there's no need for the boat anymore. But you'd think he'd keep it up for one more day so his daughter could at least have a ceremony. Although it does seem that Mr. Tipton doesn't really care about such meaningless things as such. I mean, he wasn't there in the first place. The story of London finally graduating is a very satisfying story to watch play out over time. It's clear that she always had the ability to learn and graduate high school, It's just that the majority of the adults in her life never took the time to invest in her education until Miss Tutweiller came along. You see the nuns and the other principals that she's dealt with fawn over her and accept her money her rich dad throws at them, only to toss her to the side once they've earned enough and declare her as unteachable or just too dumb. People like Tutweiller put in the time and effort to discover how she learned and give her special one-on-one time to make sure she succeeded, because she believed in her true potential and saw that she needed extra help. Sure, there was the fear of getting fired if London didn't graduate, but it's clear that she actually did care for all of her students and truly did want the best for them. And Moseby can only do so much, since he by all means is her main caretaker, even though that's not really the job he signed up for, and he has much more to focus on as well. But I'll get more into Tutweiller and Moseby later on, trust me. I feel like London's identity has been defined around getting what she wants and not trusting anyone. She has the classic heiress turn of events. She surrounds herself with yes people and pays them to adore her, only to be stabbed in the back once she's no longer of use to them. I know it's hard to feel bad for this poor little rich girl, but it's clear that her struggle to make meaningful connections in her life has caused immeasurable damage to her character. She does not know how to live her life in a selfless manner. She was just never brought up that way.
Okay, I'm sorry. Look, it's just hard to get away from what you're taught growing up. When I was a little girl, my dad used to always say, money is more important than friendship!
I really didn't mean to make Maddie seem like such a bad character in this video. I do like her a lot, but I feel like Bailey was a much better friend to London and very rarely was doing things just to get money out of her. I feel like Maddie needed to be taught that she shouldn't expect money or handouts from London just because they're friends, but Bailey from the beginning never seemed to see London as different from her peers. It is a complicated situation because I've personally never been friends with someone who could fix my entire financial situation without even worrying. All my homies live in squalor and spend our free time looking like the pizza rat in New York City, searching for scraps on the side of the road. So I actually don't know how I would react to being friends with someone like London Tipton. I might actually end up being one of the many leeches who fail to see empathy in the person just because she comes from riches. I mean, does London really owe people money just because she has a rich father? Do her friends deserve money just for the fact that they hang out with her? The show never really has a decisive notion on this, but allow me to provide some insight. Her father's funds should be reallocated to those in need, eat the rich. But in reality, I do want London to have meaningful relationships and connections in her life because I do think she's deserving of love. And by the end of On Deck, she seems to have a good support system surrounding her. I honestly would love to see a miniseries or a movie about these characters in the modern day because they truly are a decently diverse cast of characters that can go in all different directions of their life. I think London is the character I'm most interested in seeing in the modern day. Although the Sprouse brothers' sour exit from the Disney Channel probably guarantees that something like that is never going to happen. Next, I want to talk about Zack Martin. I would say that Zack as a character has the most interesting and evolved character development over time, so we'll talk about him first before we get into Cody. Mainly because I have a lot of negative things to say about Cody. Hate to break it to y'all. While Zack has always been looking for girls to date, his girl obsession kicks into full gear by the time On Deck starts, which makes a lot of sense since he's a teenage boy now, but I think a lot of the jokes, they're a telltale case of stolen or copied homework in my opinion. I would say that a majority of Zack's jokes at this point in the show are pretty much Disney Channel versions of Barney Stinson jokes from How I Met Your Mother. For those who don't know, Barney Stinson is a character who will lie, scheme, and cheat his way into sleeping with as many girls as possible, and has made a game out of seeing how many ridiculous plots he can make up to sleep with as many women as possible. All until he has a child and quits his play your ways. There's 9 seasons of character arc all in one sentence for you. Eventually, How I Met Your Mother does lean into giving Barney relationships of his own, so of course they do the same with Zack with the character of Maya. We'll get into their relationship later on in this video. Zack, of course, just dates girls instead of sleeping with them because this is a Disney Channel show. It's clear that the phrase date is supposed to imply much more through some not-so-subtle jokes, by the way. I would say that the best part of On Deck is how pretty much every character can play both the straight man and comic relief relatively easily. Zack is an example of this, since he's neither entirely dumb nor entirely smart. It's almost like the characters are fully realized people and not just archetypes squabbling to each other inside this Disney Channel echo chamber. Who would have thought? What a neat idea. No matter the episode or the plot, Zack always seems to be in it for himself and is only truly selfless when it comes to his brother, which, can cause some fun sitcom hijinks. Zack is always being told he was lesser than his brother Cody. He was less smart, less capable, and could only cause trouble. So that caused him to hyper-focus on himself and become extremely selfish, since he learned no one else was going to look out for him in the first place. Also, he's just not too aware of his surroundings, and that can get him in trouble as well. Over time, I can tell that Zack and Cody grow from causing hijinks and being wacky to causing trouble in their own kind of unique ways. They're both having to learn things the hard way through trials and tribulations, and at a certain point in the show, Zack specifically stops causing trouble on purpose. He only really gets into trouble through accidents. And I think that was really intentional with the writing. Over time, I can tell they wanted the character of Zack to evolve and grow to be a little more mature, so he goes from pulling pranks and causing trouble just because he can, to mainly trying to help out others and not really knowing how to, which is what causes him to get into trouble. They do this multiple times throughout season 3, and it honestly makes me cringe so much that sometimes I have to look away. I mentioned this a little more later on, but the Sean Kingston episode of the show, yeah, you heard me right, the Sean Kingston episode, is so bad. It's probably my least favorite episode of the entire series. It is, bafflingly awful. And in that episode, we have Zack doing one of my least favorite things, which is, having to run around playing 3 different people at the same time so he can get what he wants. So he's still pulling schemes, but more in a lighthearted way and less of a, I just want to rebel and act out. Because at the end of the day, that is what a lot of Zack's outward aggression is acting out. Like I said earlier, Zack was always kind of put down in order to praise Cody. And I feel like a lot of people don't mention that Zack has his own level of attention that he needs that I feel like he's just not being given. And he actually is the more mature one at the end of the day, especially when it comes to Cody's pride being taken away. I want to mention an episode in, I'm pretty sure, season 3, which is when they take woodshop. Cody is forced to take woodshop with Zack, and Zack is actually really good at it. He's the star student in the class. The teacher literally says, "You're my star student, I'm expecting great things from you." But Cody is awful at woodshop. It's the only class he's bad at, and he just can't handle that. And Zack realizes this and actually sacrifices his own grade so that Cody can have an A, and then he'll end up getting a D. Zack literally says, well, everyone expects me to get a bad grade anyways, so it's not a big deal. He's almost setting himself up for failure on purpose. Yes, he's helping out his brother, but it's almost like he thinks that's what he deserves. He thinks he doesn't deserve a good grade in woodshop, even though he's put in the time and effort and the work to do so. It makes me feel really bad for him, because it's you never get praised for anything. Everything he does is just always wrong. And sure, maybe he's doing that on purpose now because his self-esteem is just that low, and people just don't talk about it. Which I then think is what's causing his reaction of being super prideful and selfish, which then just causes people to treat him that same way 2 times over. So it's kind of a lose-lose situation for him. But that angst and rebellion ends up getting channeled into a more positive direction. I feel like a lot of the sitcom hijinks they get into once they're later on in high school is Zack giving unsolicited advice and then having to pay the cost of giving bad advice and ruining somebody's situation. I honestly think it's just because he wants to be important and feel like he actually knows something about something. That's that prideful element again. He wants to help, he wants to be productive, but he just doesn't have the means to. And that, I think, is where I mainly feel sympathy for him, because I think we all can feel like we're in a situation like that at times. Either way, I've really grown to like Zack as the show goes on. I would say he's really close to being one of my favorite characters. He's also just really funny, and of course comedy is subjective, but even to this day I find myself just really laughing at a lot of the jokes he tells. He's very witty, and I feel like people don't give him credit for that. The characters within the show, I mean. I know outside of the show everyone's like, yeah, Zack is just really funny, because it's actually a really funny show. Again, I might just be stunting my growth. I might have some Peter Pan syndrome here and not want to grow up, but I really like this show. I just have a fun time watching it. Even the filler episodes, most of them. I just have a good time. I don't know what to tell you. On to Cody Martin. Boy, where do we start? The best way I can describe Cody Martin is as a delusional mess. Let me explain myself. Similar to Zack, a lot of the sitcom antics Cody gets into during On Deck revolve around him being unaware or completely wrong about a social situation, and the rest of his friends playing along with him just because they're too exhausted to try and correct his behavior. I was surprised to see Cody never get called out on a lot of his toxic behavior in the same way Zack does for his actions, but honestly I think the whole trope of nice guys wasn't yet established, and most people didn't recognize that Cody's warped sense of reality and how it was no less bad than Zack's was. This has caused Cody in recent years to be reevaluated and talked about as the worst sibling, even though in my opinion I think the siblings' sins are on equal level and they're both to blame for their own problems. Almost like how it is in the real world, who would have thought? It would have been easy to make Cody a shy and introverted type in comparison to his loud and outgoing brother, but they do something different by making him just as confident and ignorant about the world, just in a completely different way than Zack. The whole polar opposites thing goes much deeper than just their aesthetics. Cody is still overly confident in his own limited mindset, the same way his brother is, but with schoolwork and being smarter than everyone else in the room rather than being sociable and popular. The constant bullying he faced from Zack growing up has caused him to become defensive, where he needs to validate his own self-worth by being the smartest person ever, since that was his only real defense against his brother. Zack's was acting out and being rebellious. This can cause him to be extremely insufferable, since he clearly isn't always in the right because he's 15 years old, and there's still so much about the world he needs to learn about. I remember Cody being my favorite growing up, but as time has gone on, I've found myself realizing that Zack is actually my favorite. Cody tends to have a big mouth and doesn't have a filter, since he never learned he could do anything wrong in the first place. So that can cause him to get in trouble from time to time, not realizing that he can hurt people's feelings by just not filtering out what he sends. Again, the two brothers are very similar in the way that they act, just their purpose coming from opposite sides. I noticed Cody will find joy in his brother's misfortune, which I don't know how normal it is. I mean, I know siblings bicker quite a lot, but to certain degrees, I feel like he could be a little more helpful to his brother, and he just isn't. Although I do want to point out that I understand that all of these elements of both of their characters is very intentional. Like, I'm not trying to say, oh, Cody's a bad person, or Zack is a bad person, because I don't really care about that specifically. I mostly care about how well written they are, and I would say they are very well written, which they have to be since they had 6 years of them growing up to work with. I would say that Cody is one of the most well-written characters. I actually really like his character, and the sort of arc they put him through over time. Again, Cody was never told that he could be in the wrong ever. Anytime a situation would happen and he was framed to be in the wrong, it would always be revealed that he was actually right all along. So that just causes him to keep believing and perpetuating this idea that, you know, he's really smart and he knows what he's talking about, and to not listen to others and to be kind of selfish in that way. Again, having a sibling and especially having a single parent can really pit everyone in the house against each other. So I really can understand where they're all coming from, and kind of having to look out for themselves out of fear of not being able to be validated. I don't know, am I making sense? Either way, I have a lot more to say about Cody when we talk about his relationship with Bailey, because there is a lot to discuss there, trust me. But I want to talk about how their relationship as brothers evolves throughout the show, real quickly. I noticed as the show went on, especially with the shift to HD for season 2, that a lot had changed with what they were planning to do with the show. Zack and Cody in season 2 spend the least amount of time with each other during the entire show's existence. There are multiple episodes in a row where Zack and Cody won't interact with each other at all, and other characters will help them move the plot along, and they'll maybe talk to each other once at the very end. It shows that their characters have moved on and grown past the opposite twins dynamic, and I can really tell from the beginning that that was something they wanted to avoid. So now that the actors were older and the characters were older, they were really able to kind of explore who they are as individuals a lot more, than in the beginning, where I think they were kind of relying on each other a little more, which makes sense. I mean, they were 11 years old when they got their own show. Season 2, Episode 12, titled Bermuda Triangle, is the episode that exemplifies this the best, in my opinion. I think they could have gone full send with it and just have the whole episode be an Elseworld bad ending style story and just never explain what's going on. But I understand that people might get confused at home, so the premise that they're in some sort of time warp because of the Bermuda Triangle makes enough sense. In this episode, it's the twins' 16th birthday, and they get into a fight as always. Carrie gives them a $200 check for their birthday. I don't know why she didn't just give them two $100 checks, because clearly they were supposed to split it. That's what it said in the card. And they end up getting in a fight and tearing it in half, and that's what causes, like, you know, the big kerfuffle. And it's like, don't you think she would have just not done that? I don't know. Then all of a sudden, as they're fighting, things shift, and we see Zack starting to act a lot like Cody normally does, with loving knitting, crocheting, baking, as well as harboring a not-so-secret crush on Bailey. It's like he's been set back to the beginning of the show, but as Cody this time. The whole gang not so subtly mentions that Zack is an only child, which is then questioned when a new student named Cody joins the boat, making sure to hit on every girl he sees within a mile radius. In this telling of the story, when Zack and Cody's parents got divorced, they split everything in half, including their children, and never told them a thing. They're also dressed cartoonishly like the stereotypes they're playing now, which is a mama's boy and a rocker dude who grew up living on the road. Something I had completely forgotten about when watching On Deck that I learned when going back and watching The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody is that this is an actual thing that almost happened in the show. I'm pretty sure the episode where their father is introduced and he comes to visit them, Zack sneaks onto the bus and ends up missing like a week of school and living on the bus with his dad's band. And he wants to move in and live with his dad instead of living with his mom and his brother. But yeah, I never realized that this episode was basically what the future would have looked like for them if that would have happened. So that's pretty cool to see that continuity get played out. What this episode does well is portray why the Zack and Cody dynamic works the best, which is that the two balance each other out and moderate each other's more negative aspects and let them become better people. In a world where Zack and Cody didn't grow up together, their instincts have been distilled and causes their personalities to be harsher and less appealing to the people around them. This is best shown by having the actors play the opposite of the typecast they had been assigned at the beginning of the show. It represents the fact of this a lot more than if they had stayed in their character in the first place. It shows that their aesthetic elements are more a form of nurture instead of nature. The series sets a firm rule on what this universe has to say about those topics within the show. A good example of this is that Cody and Bailey would still be attracted to each other even if Cody wasn't this huge brainiac like she was. Their connection is much deeper than that at the end of the day. It also shows that even if Zack was a lot more homely than brash, he still isn't quite ready for a long-term relationship yet. The two of them mellow out each other's extremes and let each other experience the best of both worlds. And yeah, this is just How I Met Your Mother again. This is the Barney and Ted dynamic with textbook-level accuracy, isn't it?
You cannot say no to being a wingman. It's in the guy rulebook. There's no guy rulebook. But there is. It's called the Geibel.
The bro code.
For many years, we had heard Barney quote the bro code, a list of do's and don'ts for all bros.
And like I said earlier, this is one of the core reasons why I like On Deck so much. It is just the perfect example of the good elements of what a sitcom can be. How episodic storytelling and overarching character arcs can coincide with one another and make a really great show. Clearly I'm incapable of not changing my appearance in between recording, so let's just ignore that. Another important episode I want to talk about that I think really encapsulates the Zack and Cody dynamic in a really interesting way is an episode in Season 2. Season 2, Episode 3, In the Line of Duty, is a very, very interesting episode to me. The plot is that Zack ends up becoming hall monitor because Moseby wants to punish him for doing a really intense prank. And the sort of B-plot, I guess you should call it B-plot subsection A, is that Cody and Bailey want to spend more time together, but they're super busy. So they scheme and try to figure out ways to meet up outside of class. Plot B subsection 2 is the fact that Bailey gets a job working at London's, like, fake shop that she's made just to be a closet. I like that it's a running joke that London keeps trying to find ways to get more closet space. I just think that they keep bringing that up throughout the entire show. I think it's really funny. I like it quite a lot. Like in season 3, there's a whole episode dedicated to like a one-off joke where they say that London has like a shoe submarine, and that was clearly just like a random bit that they just said, and then all of a sudden there's a whole episode about it in season 3. I think that's quite funny. But the reason why I bring up this episode specifically is because it encapsulates a very interesting dynamic that the twins have. Zack is hall monitor and is taking it way too seriously. Something that I appreciate that the show really sets up is that Zack likes to hyper-focus on certain things and put all of his energy and attention into it, and then also craves attention. So, of course, those two mixing together causes him to misbehave and pull pranks. So Mr. Moseby and Ms. Tutweiller kind of realize this and decide that giving him a point of authority will hopefully correct his bad behavior. But of course he goes in the opposite direction and becomes obsessed with catching as many people as possible and filling some sort of arbitrary quota as a way of feeling self-satisfied. Like most real cops do. And this causes everyone to hate him, so he resigns so he can live a life of crime again, and everything is right with the world. But there's a specific scene in this episode which is probably one of my favorite scenes in the entire show. This episode is just okay. I think they should have focused on London and Bailey running the store more, or focus on Bailey and Cody not being together as often. Having like both of those and having Bailey split her time between those episodes is like a weird meta way of addressing that like this character doesn't have enough time to spend with her relationship. Like even the plot line where she doesn't have enough time to spend time with Cody, she doesn't have enough time for that storyline because she has to work at a stupid store that's not real. So that's kind of interesting, but they should have just picked one or cut out both. And I think the Cody and Bailey storyline is infinitely more interesting just because I like them as a couple more than random antics that London and Bailey get up to. I feel like there was enough of that in Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. But besides the point. The point is that one of my favorite scenes in the entire show is when Cody and Bailey sneak out after curfew so they can spend some time together. They meet on the sky deck because them meeting in one of their dorms would be way too explicit seeming. So they meet on the sky deck and Zack catches them. And I'm sorry, but it is just internally hilarious to see the kind of dynamics swap a little bit. And they're not actually swapping, it's just that like Zack is on hyper-obsessive good boy mode and Cody has been reduced to committing crimes. It's just really funny to watch them kind of fight again, but in a different way. It's like a very different fight that they normally have. Usually Cody is having to tell Zack to stop being bad so he doesn't get in trouble in connection to, and Zack is like, just let me have fun. But now that's the opposite, except Cody isn't doing it because he wants to have fun, he's in a point of desperation, and Zack is doing it because it's what he thinks is right. I'm glad that the show recognizes that Cody isn't just naturally a better person and Zack is a worse person because of their behaviors, and that clearly this is a point of contention for them. Cody is fully willing to commit crimes and do the wrong thing for his own personal gain because he's an inherently selfish person. Mainly because he's been told he's allowed to be selfish, because he's always right and is the smartest person in the room. Versus Zack, who is also inherently selfish because he needs to be at a point of desperation, because he wants to be valid and loved, and that's clearly something that he doesn't get quite often, because he's constantly being told that he's a bad person. So clearly these two personalities clashing was inevitable. Like, for example, none of the characters are acting out of character in this moment, but their goals just happen to align with the opposite of what they normally would be aligning with. And I just think that's very novel and very neat. It was a very interesting way of showing how Zack and Cody fight. It was a new way of doing things and not just sticking with the same old, so I want to applaud the show for doing that. So I really appreciate this little sprinkle of fun that they decided to put in the series. I like it quite a lot. Like I said, the conclusion for Zack is that he just decides to stop being hall monitor so people will like him again, because you're a loser if you abide by the laws. So this scene from this episode and the whole episode I mentioned previously are good examples of the Zack and Cody dynamic. Like, they're perfect exemplifying examples of that. So I'd recommend, showing that to your friends, making a compilation video on the internet, I don't know, whatever you can. So I really like Bailey Pickett as a character, and I'm not sure if it's just because Debbie Ryan is one of my favorite people ever or not. I'll be honest, I don't have a lot to say about her, since most of her character is very much on the surface level, and a lot of her arcs only really pertain to her relationship with Cody. I know that sounds bad, but blame the writers, because other than being a farmer and Cody's nerdy girlfriend, there's not much else. As we know, Bailey grew up on a farm in Kettle Corn, Kansas, which is a town that's so small that before you know it, you've driven past it and you're in Kettle Pot. She has an aspiration to travel the world and get out of her hometown, so because of that, she was very passionate about attending 7 Seas High's School at Sea program. Something I can say about Bailey is that she's very passionate and is determined to live her life the way she wants to, no matter the obstacles or consequences. This is why she cross-dresses in the pilot. Since all of the positions for the girls on the boat were filled by the time she applied, she ended up applying as a boy and then ends up being forced to room with Zack. This is until she's found out and is at risk of being kicked off the boat, until it's revealed that London bribed her roommate to leave the boat and now there's an opening for her. Bailey and Cody don't get together till the end of season 1, and they break up by the end of season 2, so there is plenty of time to explore who she is outside of their relationship, but that exploration just never really comes. I mean, she has plenty of screen time, and she's very funny, but so is everyone else in the cast. I like that she's a little more aggressive than the average Disney Channel girl, since, she grew up on a farm, and is definitely more dominant in her relationships. You can tell Bailey kind of enjoys being in this sort of competition with Cody academically, even when they're together. Like, she likes to make bets with him and challenges his harsh eccentricities, which causes her to excel and become an even better person than she was before. I just fear that Bailey was created to just be a replacement for Maddie and as a new love interest for Cody and nothing else, which makes me really sad, honestly, because I want more for her than that. She's very smart and capable, and considering she gets into an Ivy League school at the end and is definitely smarter than Cody, I really would have liked to see more of her on screen. Apologies if this section is a bit short. So you guys know how I said in Bailey's section that she was supposed to room with Zack when she had applied as a boy? And that once it's found out that London doesn't have a roommate anymore, she starts boarding with her? Well, I bet most of you guys had the question, who's Zack's roommate now? Or maybe you didn't have that question because you were too enthralled with my deep character analysis to notice. Or you're listening to this in the background while playing Subway Surfers or something and aren't paying much attention. Either way, you're valid, and for the rest of season 1, Zack does not have a roommate. This is until season 2, episode 10, Roomies, where it's revealed that Marcus Little is now attending 7 Seas High and is Zack's new roommate. Marcus is a child musician who was booted from his record label after getting to the ripe old age of 16, and has now enrolled in the School at Sea program to start a new life. I really like the idea of Marcus as a character. He's a very much welcomed presence. For some reason he's billed as a new main character, even though, people like Woody aren't. Which confuses me since Woody is definitely more involved in the plot than Marcus ever has been, but I'm not gonna get too mad at it or anything. Marcus's rap name was Lil, because he was, small, and they only seemed to write one song for him, which was called Retainer Baby. Truly inspired, absolute bop, no notes. The only real plot lines Marcus gets involved in surround his other classmates, which is fine. He's a side character and he fills that role really well. Plus, his character is very clearly stated as someone who feels like he's missed out on childhood by being a child celebrity, and his only main goal on the boat is to have fun with his friends and get involved in their antics. So it makes complete sense that he's getting caught up in these silly plots with the other characters and not doing much else. He's shown to have a crush on London, and a part of me wonders if they really could have considered making them a romantic story arc or not, if Marcus hadn't left the show so early, but I'm not sure. Just like a majority of London's love interests that aren't just one-off characters, She generally sees them as gross and ignores all of their advances, but I don't know, I feel like they were, kind of setting up some legitimacy between these characters as like a real couple, maybe. Marcus is either described as being still rich from his previous work, or now as broke because his record label bled him dry and left him with nothing. That characterization is never really clarified, but overall Marcus is supposed to come from means, and because of that, I think that's why the writers wanted to maybe pair him up with London. But again, this would never work, since London is canonically in her 20s at the start of On Deck, and is just way too old to date anyone in the main cast. And the constant jokes they make about her and Zack is so weird to me. And the same goes for Marcus, because Marcus is supposed to be the same age as Zack. In Season 1, London pretends to be Zack's mother, and in Season 3, she pretends to be his girlfriend. Someone please dump battery acid down my throat. Anyways, Marcus's storyline does get continued in the Breakup in Paris 2-parter, which is such a good piece of television. I love it so much, but I'll try to save my enthusiasm for it a little bit later on. But in this episode, Marcus finds out that he's still very big in Paris, which excites him a lot, only to realize that his record label has hired a fake younger version of him to continue performing and fool international audiences. So his record label did to him what the Zombies record label did to them. I have a feeling no one's going to get that reference, but I'm going to leave it in. They don't do nearly as much with his storyline as they should have, in my opinion, because that's a really intense thing to happen to a performer, yet most of the story is just Marcus chasing around this fake child until he admits fault and then is willing to work with him. Marcus has a very awkward and abrupt exit from the show in the middle of Season 3, where in the background of an episode he's been creating new songs for like a possible hip-hopera, as he calls it. And it's all based on the only song they've written for him, which is Retainer Baby. So I can't even imagine what that musical's going to be about, but they directly reference Green Day in this episode, so I'm having a good time no matter what.
I figured if Green Day can take their album to Broadway, I can do the same with my mega hit, Retainer Baby.
Green Day is one of the most popular bands in the world, while you wrote a song about a girl with bad teeth.
But at the end of the episode, after, the real conflict has been solved, it's revealed that Marcus's musical has been picked up and he'll be leaving to Boat to work on that in New York City. I mean, I'm really happy for Marcus, I really am, and they kind of give him a nice send-off at the very end of the episode, but he's only really on the show for around maybe 1 season in total, and I wish he would have had more time with the cast. It's especially weird how Maya was introduced in episode 4, and by episode 6, Marcus is written off the show, which originally made me think they kicked him off so they can make room for a new character in the cast, but I think in reality, it's definitely less shady. I'm almost certain Marcus left the show because Doc Shaw, who plays that character, got a lead role on the Disney XD show Pair of Kings with Mitchell Musso, since the timeline seems to line up. So it's kind of a shame that really only got the character of Marcus for such a short amount of time, because he was a great presence to have around. You can tell there are episodes in Season 3 where his presence is missed. There's an episode where Zack, Cody, and Woody have a guys' night where they play video games, and Mr. Moseby is just like the 4th guy in their team. It's clear that the story would have rather have had a 4th teenage boy in the cast, but, there's no one left there, so they have to supplement with Moseby. But you know what? Don't get me wrong, though. I kind of love the idea that Mr. Moseby plays violent alien first-person shooter games with these 3 teenagers in his off time. Like, they did the best with what they had, and, I found myself liking it. Also, I think it's weird that technically Maya and Marcus share 1 episode with each other, but they do not interact whatsoever. So, that's just such a weird thing to think about. Anyways, I like Marcus. He's cool. Hate to see you go so soon. Uh-oh, favorite character alert. I know I've become incredibly predictable on this channel now, but I just can't help it. Woody Fink is my favorite character in On Deck. Woody is a character that is not supposed to go beyond the superficial, and I do not care one bit. He's the most enjoyable part of the show, and whenever he's on screen, he's the character I want to care about the most. Woody is the character that I would be if I was in a sitcom, honestly. I'm just like the tubby side character with not much else but jokes for the audience to laugh at. And I'm pretty comfortable being in that lane, and I think Woody is too, which is why, I relate to him so much. There are some elements of his character to look at, however, so let's examine those few little bits. Over time, we start to hear about his fraught relationship that Woody has with his parents, or more accurately, how much he hates his stepdad, Steve. Steve is this show's running joke with Woody, and it makes me laugh every time they mention him. It's a really good running joke. You can tell the writers really liked this running joke and made an effort to give it layers and slowly let it unfold in front of you as time goes on. Apparently, Steve started out as Woody's swim coach and over time became his mother's lover. And it seems that after his addition to the family, Woody was eventually cast aside. It seems to be implied multiple times that the only reason why Woody is on the School at Sea program is because his stepdad Steve wanted to send him away. Now, how Woody's sister factors into this is up for debate. She's not really even mentioned until like an episode in season 3 where she goes on a date with Cody. So, they might have a fraught relationship, who knows? Other than that, Woody's main thing is that, he eats a lot of food because he's fat. But you know what? He's also really funny, and I think that's something that people take for granted a lot. The beauty of On Deck is that everyone gets riffed on and riffs on others an equal amount. Like, there's no weak link in the cast to where, like, they're just constantly being shit on and are just, like, incapable of doing the same to others. Like, everyone is at equal playing field when it comes to, like, jokes and being shit on. So, in that sense, it actually ends up working pretty well. Like, you don't notice that Woody is constantly being, like, absolutely demolished by his friends because he does the same thing back to them. It kind of almost seems like that's just the dynamic that they have now, Although sometimes with Cody, you can tell that he just can't take it. So, like, maybe he should, establish that with people, but that's besides the point. Yeah, Woody is definitely, like, one of the funniest characters. And it might just be the actor's performance that really sells it for me because it's doing a lot for me, okay? Like I said, he's like, whenever he's on screen, I just have a good time. And the other big thing to mention when it comes to Woody is his relationship. Addison is the character that is introduced once in season 1, and I think the writers enjoyed her presence so much that they recast her as like a sort of like secondary side character in seasons 2 and 3. She isn't enough of a character to get her own segment, but she is Woody's girlfriend, so I wanted to mention her in general because she's a great addition to the show. So I'm just kind of, weaving her story in here. This will be a good way to transition us into the relationships section of the show because we have a lot to talk about the ships in this show. So Addison in season 1 is introduced as a character with one joke. It seems that she was supposed to be a completely normal teenager, and in the episode specifically, there's like supposed to be a candy themed party happening, but like they can't have the party or they can't have the candy because of the rain, so she just eats all of the candy. And then the bit is that she gets like sugar high, which I don't think is a real thing, but she gets like sugar high and acts like she's on cocaine for the rest of the episode. And then she disappears for the rest of season 1. So that kind of like running gag that they do in that episode specifically, Addison is someone who is like talking really, really fast and like bouncing across the walls and like running in circles. And I bet they thought that was really funny. And they're like, we should have that actress come in and do that again. So when they bring her back in season 2, her thing is that she's just like really hyperactive and like talks really, really fast. And that's like the only thing that defines her character, is that she talks very, very fast and she's very energetic. Woody and Addison originally meet in a video game. I think it's supposed to be like a parody of like The Sims or like Second Life or something. They meet and they kind of like start an online relationship that sense, and then they decide to meet each other in person without knowing who they are, and then once they realize that they're like classmates, it's like kind of awkward, but they're able to find like a kind of cute relationship by the end of an episode. And then that's dropped for a good chunk of time because, Addison doesn't come back until a later episode where there's like a game show parody and they're supposed to be like a couple by that point, I'm pretty sure. Again, that episode is another example of Zack and London being paired up romantically together. It's just so weird. Stop doing it, please. What is with this show and pairing up Zack with older women? Like, this is a thing. There's a pattern of behavior, and I don't like it. So I said that Addison and Woody are supposed to be in a relationship, but literally in the next episode, he like goes on a date with like a model. So like maybe they were just like doing that school assignment together and like still have feelings for each other, but aren't like really, confirmed yet. I don't know. It's not really brought up again until the very almost final episode of the show. In the prom episode, which I just consider like part 1 of like the finale 2-parter, which is like the prom episode and the graduation episode. In the prom episode, there's like, some very superficial arguments that Woody and Addison have. Misunderstanding plot. It's a sitcom after all. Addison thinks Woody asked another girl to prom, when in reality he was just practicing to ask her to prom. This has been done in every single show before already. But then they go to prom and they realize that they wanted to be with each other, and so they be with each other. And then they're just supposed to be together by then, but then in the actual finale, they don't even interact once. So you're like, okay, so they're a couple, but like right before graduation, are they ever going to see each other again? I don't know. Again, I wanted to mention their relationship in Woody's section specifically because their romance isn't enough to get its own like section, like with Zack and Maya, but I didn't want to just not mention it at all. So here's me mentioning it. I think her and Woody are like a really adorable couple, in all honesty. Like, I think they work together really well. It's probably the least toxic romance in the entire show. So, time to get into the toxic stuff. Oh god, we're finally gonna do it. We're doing it, guys. This might be the longest segment in the entire video, just based off of the amount of paragraphs I've already written. That's not even including the amount of riffing I'm probably gonna do. I would say my scripts are 75 to 50% written, and then 25 to 50% riffed, so it's gonna, strap in guys, we're in for a long haul. The Cody-Bailey relationship is definitely the most interesting element of the show in my opinion. Of course the breakup in Paris is truly iconic, the Twister 3-parter is truly iconic, and what they do with their characters throughout season 3 once they're broken up is very interesting as well. Before they got together, I think it was smart to have Cody and Bailey be a slow burn into their relationship and for them to wait for the entirety of season 1 to get together. But I also think it was imperative for them to get together sooner rather than later in the show. I'm pretty sure other shows have proved how a boy constantly pining after a girl in a case of unrequited affection can get tiring over time, especially if there's never a plan to fulfill that relationship in the first place. Luckily, I can tell the Sweet Life team always had their relationships planned out, and they did a decent job of working on their kinship during the chaos of a crossover episode. I wish the two had acknowledged more often that Hannah Montana is the reason they got together at the end of season 1. I wanted to talk about the breakup in Paris right away, but there's a whole season of them being together before that. In season 2, a lot of their relationship is very honeymoon phase, I would say, where they giggle at each other's jokes and they're very lighthearted and very rarely do they fight. A lot of the plot lines surrounding them actually have to deal with them wanting to spend more time together but not being able to because of external sitcom forces. And a lot of the jokes they do with the two is them sneaking out to kiss, and only kiss, because it's a Disney Channel show. So multiple times throughout the show you'll see them sneaking out past curfew to kiss. Let's move on. Of course they do fight occasionally, like I said in the school assignment episode where they have to pretend to be married. They do end up fighting because Cody takes advantage of Bailey's kindness, and I think that was a Disney Channel way of simulating what a deadbeat husband and overworking wife kind of situation might be. Cody fake breaks his legs and is just an absolute nuisance towards Bailey. And they've resolved the issue at the end of the episode, but they don't really resolve the real root of the problem, which is that Cody is an extremely selfish person. I think it's finally time to talk about the breakup in Paris, guys. I have so many opinions on this episode, it's just so good. First off, I think the balance of other stuff to the main plot, which is, Cody and Bailey's anniversary, is done pretty well. Maybe I'm just a corny fool, but I think Zack and Woody accidentally stealing a painting and running from French thugs is very funny, and all of the cheap sets and bad green screen just adds to my enjoyment tenfold. Again, it's like the stupid fairy tale episode all over again. I know people hate fairy tale episodes and sitcoms, but like, I don't know, I just love the Zack and Cody one. I'm perfectly content with y'all thinking this B-plot is childish and lame. I understand it's not for everybody. At its worst moments, this show is basically a cartoon, and it doesn't always work, but I can handle this moment because it's intercut with the real relationship drama of Cody and Bailey. But I understand if people think that intercutting cheapens both stories. I get both sides of it. See, this is what having a real sibling is like. You call your brother on the phone and you're like, "Hey, how was your day?" And it's like, "Yeah, today was awful. I broke up with my longtime girlfriend on our anniversary and bawled my eyes out for hours. What about you?" "Oh, me? I jumped out of an airplane and saved an important painting from being stolen. It was awesome." But beyond the stolen painting and the runners of Moseby accidentally winning the Tour de France and Marcus trying to clear a case of stolen identity, there's Cody and Bailey at the center. Bailey is basically being harassed all day by this French painter who wants to date her, but she stays adamant in the fact that, she cares for Cody and doesn't want to cheat on him, even if it's something as simple as, talking with him for more than, 30 minutes at a time. Meanwhile, Cody is doing a run-through of his anniversary date with London to make sure it turns out right. I like Cody and London together in plots like this. It lets London as a character kind of come back down to reality for a bit and be the straight man in opposition to Cody's eccentricities. Another example of Cody living in that world of delusions because he was never told he could be wrong before in his life, etc., etc. That element of his character is actually what mainly leads to their breakup in the first place, at least in my opinion. Now, I'm not on Bailey's side when she decided to seek comfort in that French painter after thinking she saw Cody flirt with another girl in the Eiffel Tower during their anniversary, because in reality, it's not like Cody has done that before. It really doesn't seem in his nature, but I'm not going to say that Bailey's reaction was completely out of character either. I think the two of them consistently refuse to communicate with one another when there's been a misunderstanding, mainly because they're characters in a sitcom, so they kind of need to be that way for certain plots to go on. But I'm okay with it because Bailey not communicating with Cody after this interaction isn't something I'm against, and it actually seems like, something that her character would actually do. And I actually think the fight that leads to their breakup is, pretty well balanced. I was kind of waiting for some silly moment that leads to them officially splitting, some off-the-wall random statement that, you would never expect either one of them to say, but that doesn't really happen. They just say some really rude things to each other, and after hearing those things, they mutually agree that they need to break up. It's sad that a silly misunderstanding like this would lead a 1-year relationship to be separated for so long, but I think it's definitely realistic, especially for two teenagers. So I think that's one of the main reasons why I think their relationship is one of the best elements of the series, when it comes to them being together, and also when it comes to them being broken up. Now, the fallout of their breakup throughout season 3 is really cool to watch play out, especially since huge revelations with their characters will play out in relatively unimportant scenes that are mainly played for comedy. So, allow me to explain the evolution of their entire relationship throughout season 3. So episode 1 shows them heartbroken and attempting to get over their relationship in their own special ways. Cody becomes a monk, and Bailey and London are mean to Miss Tutweiller for no reason.
For a little help with a book report on War and Peace.
Have you tried reading it?
Good one, Friar Yuck. You seen the size of this thing? This is a cinder block. That Leo Toy Story was a real windbag.
Episode 2 shows them being nasty towards each other and attempting split custody after putting their child up for adoption finally. The child being a rat, and they give the rat to Kirby. I was just going to leave that joke as it is, but I felt the need to explain that they don't actually have a child, because this show does some pretty absurd stuff, so it's a rat. They have a rat child. It's a pet. Episode 3 shows them trying to prove they moved on by dating other people, only to come to the general understanding that they're not ready for that yet, but they're also not ready to be on good terms. As Woody says in his signature catchphrase, it's a bit awkward. Episode 7 is Cody dating a computer. Just ignore that aspect. All you need to know is that Cody realizes he wants to be in a relationship again and is tired of being alone. Episode 8 shows them still getting along, but due to another miscommunication, leaves Cody to think that all women are evil harpies looking to destroy men at every step of the way. This is also the episode with Sean Kingston in it. Truly one of the worst episodes of the entire show. I swear, it's so bad. I wish Maya and Zack didn't get together in this episode, because I wouldn't have to think about it so often. Cody is ready to start a relationship again and misinterprets Bailey as thinking the same thing, and she breaks his heart literally as well as metaphorically. Cody then acts like a beta male when trying to give Zack advice to his new girlfriend, and he's an idiot in the next episode. Truly one of the lowest moments for him in the entire show, the season 3, episode 9 episode Love and War, it's bad. He's on evil mode in this episode, I swear.
Captain, and the guys needed me.
Why didn't you just tell me that?
Yeah. Zack! Why didn't you just tell her? What, are you scared of your girlfriend or something?
In episode 13, Bailey sees Cody going on a date with another girl, and he actually seems to be enjoying himself. In episode 13, Bailey sees Cody going on a date with another girl, who's Woody's sister, and he actually enjoys himself, which now makes her realize that she wants to get back together with him, flip-flopping the dynamic halfway through the season, which is what they always do in sitcoms like this. This is Ross and Rachel all over again, guys. Actually, if I'm going to keep up the How I Met Your Mother analogy, this is Robin and Ted all over again. And guess what Zack and London's stunt double do in the B-plot? Some more weird shit. Episode 16 then has Cody write a play about their breakup to vent all of his frustration out through his classmates in a way that hurts Bailey so much that she literally leaves the boat to visit her family for a bit. I lied. This is actually Cody's lowest moment in the entire show. It was really bad. It was a really bad decision of his. It's only in that moment, when he sees how much he's hurt Bailey, does he realize that he's actually shared some of the blame for the breakup all the way back in the season 2 finale. He really thought that she was the only one in the wrong this whole time. This episode was very important for his development as a character because they could not have gotten back together up until this moment now, since Cody was still refusing to believe that he had done anything wrong and had any fault in their breakup. Their relationship would not have worked long term if Cody hadn't done some serious growth at that exact moment in the show. This is when the Twister 3-parter happens, which, if you cut all the filler out, is probably only really a 2-parter, but that's besides the point, in which the two reunite after Cody shows he cares about Bailey by saving her family's farm. I think them getting back together in this way is a little bit contrived, like they're like, well, the 3-parter is about them getting back together, so they have to. But, I mean, I'm glad they're back together. And, Cody did all the work he needed to, so it ended up working out. Because Bailey realized she was in the wrong quite a while ago in season 3, like she figured it out much faster than him, so that's why it took him so long to finally get on her level when it comes to being ready for a relationship again. After the Twister 3-parter, there's only 3 more episodes left in the entire show, and only the B-plot of one of those episodes really analyzes what the relationship is going to be like now after the breakup. This is the first episode where both Cody and Zack have girlfriends, and only in the beginning scene do they really acknowledge that and kind of reference it as a thing that exists, because after that the two split off as they always do in the later episodes of the series, and Cody's plot revolves around him realizing that Bailey doesn't think he's funny. I guess what this is supposed to mean for the show is that while Cody and Bailey might be together again, all of the honeymoon glamour and glitz of their relationship is definitely gone, and they're going to be much more serious and honest with each other with their emotions going forward. And of course the prom episode has Bailey being so obsessed with becoming prom queen that she sort of ignores Cody during the whole thing, reflecting the yes honey point of the relationship they might get into, but the show does end by showing that, that's not the case, that they do still have good communication with one another, and they're able to get along, and Cody isn't just, being dragged by her, if that makes sense. I think they acknowledged that that's where their relationship could go, but that's not where it's going to go. And I think that's really important because the next episode, which is the finale, really puts their relationship to the ultimate test. Also, something I find really interesting is the relationship or lack of relationship that Maya and Bailey have. Because I'm pretty sure they only interact with each other once in the entire show, and it's not a positive interaction. So I don't know what they were trying to do there. I don't want to pit women against each other. That's not my thing. I don't want them to have beef. I want them to be besties. So I don't know what they were doing here. They should have figured that out before the show ended, but whatever. They probably were just being lazy.
Why do you guys care so much about this prom queen thing? I just want to have fun. I see what you're doing. What? Pretending you don't care about being prom queen when you really do? I mean, you obviously read that study on how false humility appeals to voters.
No, I didn't. I don't have a subscription to Psycho Chick Monthly.
Oh, you want to make this campaign about mudslinging? Because no one slings mud like me, sister. In fact, one year, that was literally my job on the farm.
Okay, ladies,
I'm
please.
a hard worker.
The finale does a very shocking thing with Cody's character that was very, very smart and was probably something they had planned from the very beginning. Cody and Bailey both applied to Yale, and the reason why Cody specifically wants to go to Yale is because all throughout the original series, The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody, he wanted to go to Harvard, but then in a season 1 episode of On Deck, he accidentally ends up, dating the daughter of the admissions officer, so he gets in a fight with the guy who's the head of admissions at Harvard, and so he's basically never guaranteed, a spot at Harvard ever. He's never going to be allowed into that building ever again. So at that point, he decides he wants to go to Yale. So him and Bailey apply to Yale together, and we find out that Cody didn't get in, but Bailey did. So now Cody must navigate what his life is going to be like now that he's not getting into his dream college, or possibly not even getting into any Ivy League at all, when that's the only thing he's really planned for himself since the very beginning. And Bailey has to grapple with the fact that she might have to, break up with her boyfriend for the second time already. And during graduation, they are co-valedictorian, which I think was a cop-out. They should have just made Bailey valedictorian, because they end up sharing a speech. Because during that shared speech, she admits to everyone that she'd rather stay with him and not go to Yale, because she'd rather, continue their relationship than, start this opportunity on a different part of the world. But, the episode does end with them confirming that Bailey is going to go to Yale, but they're going to stay together, possibly long distance at this point, because the show leaves open-ended what Zack and Cody are going to do at the finale, for a very specific reason, which I'll explain later. So their relationship ends on a very mature note, that, even though they are high school sweethearts, they're clearly in it for the long run, and they've been together for long enough to where we can truly understand that, this is something that they should legitimately consider, which, is a different situation from Zack and Maya, which I'm going to talk about now. So the idea of Zack and Maya is probably one of my favorite elements of the show. Again, I know I said Cody and Bailey was my favorite element of the show, so now that I'm saying that Zack and Maya is my second favorite element of the show, that might make you think that I'm really obsessed with ships. I'm not really a shipper when it comes to watching a TV show at the end of the day. I know there's a lot of people who only watch shows when they know that there's prominent ships in them, and I'm not one of those people. I actually kind of prefer it when they don't focus on romance, because sometimes it gets in the way of the actual plot. But when a sitcom like this, has such well-written romantic sub-storylines, I'm into them. I like it. Also, ships just absolutely hook all of the 12-year-olds watching at home, so they really leaned into it once the actors were, older. So, like Addison, Maya doesn't really have enough time within the show to really get her own character section, and her only real main purpose within the show is to be Zack's girlfriend, but, they do give her some stuff, because she's introduced around 1/3 of the way into season 3, and then, she stays to the finale, and there are many episodes where she's just not there at all, and Zack has to make up an excuse as to why his girlfriend isn't there. So I think they should have used the minimal amount of time she had in the show to their better advantage, but they didn't, so I'm just gonna have to live with that. But I'm almost certain the writers sat down and they thought, okay, we want to actually give Zack a real romantic storyline, because again, he's Barney Stinson. So what kind of person would Zack be able to enter a long-term relationship with? And I think the conclusion they came to was a female version of Zack. And now Maya isn't entirely just that, but I'm pretty sure that's probably what the log line was of her character when they first established her, is that she's a female version of Zack. But luckily, I think Zoe Deutsch, who, is a really big time actress now, and she was only in 5 episodes of Zack and Cody. That's really crazy to think about. I think she brought a much different presence to her character that made her not feel like that. Because Maya as a character is someone who loves sports and junk food, and she loves video games, and like those are all perfectly fine things for a girl to like, of course, but you know, they just can't help it but do the she's not like other girls thing in this show. I mean, they dance around it pretty well, but like it's so obvious. Like in one of Cody's lowest moments is, you know, a Maya and Zack centric episode, and like very specifically, you know, she's seen as like a guy's kind of girl, you know, she's a cool girl or whatever, and that's why, you know, Cody's in the wrong at the end of the day. Like, it's always implied that, like, Cody is right that all women are evil harpies, but Maya's an exception because she's a cool girl, because she eats cold pizza. She likes cold pizza and hot wings, so, you know, she's different. And obviously I don't agree with that, and I just have to keep telling myself, you know, this show's for children, and that's a lesson that children need to be taught, and not grown adults. So yeah, watch season 3, episode 9, Love and War again, just in case you need a refresher. I don't know. But Maya's whole thing is that she's not so easily swayed by Zack's, you know, cheap game of romance to, like, you know, rack up a body count as high as possible. So in the episode where she's introduced, she explicitly says that she wants to be friends with him, and that he should be friends with a girl for once in his life. So yes, he does start off being just friends with Maya, but like they don't even try for once to convince you that he actually is okay with just being her friend, and this is just like a part of, you know, the long haul to then becoming his girlfriend, her girlfriend. I've been doing that a lot. I've been misgendering Zack specifically a lot, and I've been having to cut it out. So originally, in the Sean Kingston episode, the worst episode of the show, although the computer date episode is also really bad, the one where Cody dates a robot. Season 3 is definitely my favorite season of the show because, you know, it has the most like complex dynamics within the characters because they've built up continuity, but also there are just like some real clunkers in this season. You know, there's not a lot of consistency, so that's kind of a problem on itself. Something I also forgot to mention is that a lot of the characterization does get a little bit warped over time, just a little bit. Like, I noticed specifically Cody is characterized as being more shy and definitely consistently having like health issues and being weak. Zack always like calls him effeminate, which is really weird. Like, almost every punchline that Zack makes towards Cody is him being a girl, and I just feel like that's not funny and uncalled for. It wasn't something I noticed on my first and second watch, but only on my third, so I felt the need to mention that as well, that a lot of the jokes are a bit off in season 3 as well. Although I think generally they've done enough good work within the show that it doesn't feel too much like, you know, the characters are in like a different timeline or whatever. So yeah, even though I do praise season 3 a lot, and I talk about it a lot, especially at this back half of the video, I do acknowledge that there are a lot of problematic elements as well that I just didn't really notice because I was focusing on all the good stuff. So yeah, you know, be aware going into this show in general, they definitely could have done better in that sense. But anyways, in the Sean Kingston episode, that is when Maya and Zack officially start dating. And something that I think is interesting of note is to show that Zack and Maya end up basically getting together the same way that Cody and Bailey do. In the episode where Maya is introduced, before Zack is, you know, understanding that he needs to be friends with her first, Cody tells him to follow his 6-month plan. You know, the classic running joke throughout season 1 that Cody was trying to get Bailey with. He had this 6-month plan to get her, and it actually ended up working. He was friends with her for 6 months, and then she is the one who asked him to go on a date. So, you know, his 6-month plan worked. So he gives it to Zack, and Zack just like doesn't interpret it well. Because in Cody's 6-month plan, he specifically mentions the kettle corn festival he threw for her on the boat when she was feeling homesick. And so Zack thinks he needs to throw Maya a kettle corn like festival, but like she's from Boston as well, I think, and she likes sports, and she's like not from the country, so she just finds it offensive that he would think that she would want something like that. So he gives up on the 6-month plan. He says it's stupid. But then in the Sean Kingston episode, when they do get together, it's because he threw her a birthday party that was specifically tailored towards her interests, because, you know, he actually sat down and had a real conversation with her for once, and he figured out that she loves sports, so he threw her a sports-themed birthday party, and she loved it so much that she decided to start dating him. And it's like, so the 6-month plan is like this weird, like, cosmic established thing where it's like it works for everybody. Or at least it works for the Martin brothers. So either way, in the Sean Kingston episode, they start dating. And then, like I said, Love and War, which is the exact next episode, immediately throws, like, some issues into their relationship. Cody's on beta male mode in this episode, so he tells Zack that Maya is doing very specific things to manipulate and trick him into, saying something wrong so they can get in a fight. Which Bailey never did for Cody, so I don't know why he's thinking this. Like, maybe he just listened to too many, like dude bro podcasts that week. But yeah, Cody keeps trying to tell Zack that, your girlfriend's gonna try and trick you and get you into a fight. Like, she's doing it on purpose. She's being manipulative. When in reality, she's not at all. And she literally tells him at the end, like, we should just have conversations with each other if we're confused about something. Like, I'm not gonna get offended and you shouldn't get offended either. And Zack was like, oh, that sounds like a great thing. Like, how come all relationships don't do that? It's really kind of funny, actually. Like, Cody is like, you have to change everything about yourself to contort yourself to be with the evil harpy woman. And you're like, what are you talking about? This is a show for children. They need to be taught this lesson. This is a show for children. Adults don't need to know this stuff because they already know it. They already know it. Adults already know this. I really hope adults already know this stuff. So that episode I have a weird fascination about. Actually, if I'm being honest with you guys, going off script, Season 3, Episode 9, Love and War, is the whole reason why I'm making this video in the first place. Because like I said, I decided to watch this show, and when I got to that episode, which is like very near the end of the show, it like surprised me so much that I had to be like taken aback and like, really absorb it and be like, this is something I need to talk about. Much more than I ever need to talk about Euphoria. Zack and Maya's relationship comes to a very interesting conclusion. And again, there's a lot to discuss here. They go to prom together, that goes pretty smoothly for them. And then that leads into the graduation episode, which is the finale. Now, I like what they did with Zack and Maya, but also it feels unsatisfactory because they had so little time to be together. But I guess that's what makes it more realistic, but from like an actual narrative standpoint is not the best. So early on in the episode, we find out that Maya has been accepted into the Peace Corps. Sure, we've never once established that, she's into humanitarian things or that she's like she really cares about, like global politics, but she's been accepted into the Peace Corps. So she's going to be sent to Chad, Africa. So literally within a few months, she's going to be leaving the continent. And Zack is like, I'm going to have to break up with her. But then very soon realizes that he doesn't want to break up with her because he's in love with her. Like, he wants to say the L word to her. So Zack, puffs his chest, walks up to her and says, I'm in lesbians with you. We can do long distance. It'll be great. And then Maya says, I don't think long distance is going to work. So I'm dumping you. And Zack just can't handle that. So that's why the finale sets up the fact that both Zack and Cody plan on skipping graduation because they're emotionally distraught. And see, realistically, it makes sense that Zack and Maya would break up because canonically they've only been together for 3 months. He specifically says that they've been together for 3 months. But also, like, from a narrative standpoint, it's not satisfactory because we've only really seen like 3 or 4 episodes really analyze their relationship, and in every single episode they've concluded that this is like a really good ship and that like they're in it for the long haul and they could be like a real good relationship. But just life gets in the way and they have to split up. It's very realistic. It happens to probably millions of people around the world every day. Well, I guess only really around graduation season. So I think it was a really, really smart way to give Zack some more depth during the finale. Because, to be honest, Zack had kind of coasted throughout most of On Deck. He did a lot of growth and development at the start, but throughout the entire show, he never really had any motivation other than, like, have fun. Like, what teenager doesn't have the motivation to have fun, So I wouldn't be surprised if the writers specifically wanted to give Zack a girlfriend so he could have this sort of breakup arc in the finale to kind of tackle that topic and have it be like a lesson for children to learn at home. Like, I fully get if that was the case. But if they're going to do that, I think they should establish Maya as a real character outside of that, and they never really did. So you can see why it's not satisfying. Because I like the idea that they did that bold move. Because, if this was like a different show, they would have kept them together long distance and it wouldn't have been worth it and you would have felt like that was unrealistic. But because we had so little time with them, it feels really, really sad and tragic to see them break up. But I guess that's, at the end of the day, a good thing. So yeah, there's Zack and Maya. They have a very tragic ending, but I really liked them together as a couple. I love Zack's new arc as like a boyfriend. I think that was a really smart thing to do with this character, and I wish they would have had more time to analyze that, because they don't. Anyways, let's move on to Mr. Moseby and Ms. Tutweiller. This is a section I wasn't going to include originally, but screw it, I'm just gonna have some fun here. So, for the majority of Marion Moseby's existence within the Sweet Life series, he's never been depicted as really having a romantic interest, as far as I'm aware. A lot of this show's lore has become goo in my brain, I can't lie. So Miss Tutweiller is the Seven Seas High's history teacher, I'm pretty sure. Although, since she's the only teacher we really ever see, besides that therapist, which I'm not going to talk about because it makes me really upset. So since Emma Tutweiller is the only teacher we see, she kind of ends up teaching all different kinds of studies in her class, like science and English and stuff. Maybe she's like a universal teacher for the small group of students on the School at Sea program, but we do hear that there are other teachers on the boat other than Tutweiller, like including elective teachers. So I really think they were just being lazy and didn't want to cast multiple teachers. And also they were like kind of trying to build continuity with Tutweiller specifically, so I understand. There's an episode in season 1 where the child characters suspect that Moseby and Tutweiller are secretly dating. This gets proven to be false, but it seems to be that they have some sort of romantic inclination towards each other. And then this idea is dropped for the entire show and isn't brought up until season 3. Again, they did the same thing with Woody in season 2, but I think what happens is that they establish things and then realize they have all these other plot lines they want to deal with, and so they just wait a season to actually, do it again. Or maybe they're testing audience reactions. Like, maybe people responded very positively to, like, Moseby and Tutweiller, so then they just decided to really run with it in season 3. So in the season 3 episode, So You Think You Can Date, which is the one where, Cody and Bailey try to date other people to make each other jealous, the B-plot is where we learn a little bit more about Marion and Emma's background. It's really sweet to see them connect in an honest way through their shared hardships growing up, since they don't actually share this with each other directly, but it's something we can feel between them. And it's something that we as the audience know now, and it kind of gives us a reason to really root for them together. After that, there's some discourse surrounding their romance. It seems like maybe the writers forgot about the romance, or they didn't want to admit that they forgot about it, so they awkwardly inserted an instance where Moseby directly says that they went on a date, but it never really went anywhere after that. So now Moseby tries to spend the B-plot trying to get her back. The B-plot of the episode where Cody makes the play about his breakup with Bailey, and, reaches his lowest point in the entire show. Yeah, the B-plot is Mr. Moseby and Mrs. Tutweiller actually getting together, and they stay together for the rest of the show. I can appreciate this kinship so much, mainly because these characters have had the exact same joke throughout the entire show, which is that they are pathetic adults who have nothing better to do but police what children do around them. I mean, if you think about it, the kind of jobs that they have, they kind of can't have, personal lives. Because Mrs. Tutweiller, she's the only teacher really willing to move out onto a boat and travel the world. Clearly she can't have a husband. And I think in season 1, this was a one-time joke they made that, she's a sad cat lady who doesn't get a date. But, by season 3, it's ramped into full gear. They constantly make jokes that she has, 30 cats, which seems impossible because she lives on a boat. How can she have 30 cats on a boat? Besides the point. They really run into the ground that, Mrs. Tutweiller is a sad old cat lady, even though she doesn't even seem that old. And, Moseby from the very beginning has been characterized as, somebody who is very work-centric, only cares about his job, and, is constantly making jokes about how, his mother is judging him for not having a wife yet, that kind of stuff. Especially since his younger brother and older brother are both so highly achieving in their field, And Moseby is too, but, sometimes that kind of stuff doesn't get appreciated as much from the middle children. So, because these two characters had basically the exact same joke about them for the entirety of On Deck, it makes sense that the way that they get a positive, happy ending for both of their characters would for them to, join together in matrimony. So Mr. Moseby didn't get his own section in this video, mainly because I did want to talk about him a little bit more here, and also because, like Bailey, he is in the show a lot, but there's not a lot for him to do, if that makes sense. He mainly has, like, a mode that he's on. He's either on, like, stop the antics mode, or, like, silly, goofy adult mode. So Mr. Moseby's whole life, from what we've seen in this show, was to, run a Tipton service and to take care of Mr. Tipton's daughter. So now that London is officially graduating, that means Mr. Moseby pretty much is losing his job. Like in the finale, he specifically says that it's his last day. The boat is being dismantled during graduation, and Mr. Moseby makes a specific point to yell at Mr. Tipton and basically quit, so the graduation can continue, because he knows that it's something that's really important to London and, all of the other students, because he cares really deeply about them. So it's implied that Mr. Moseby has finally grown a backbone, because throughout all of this show, he has been at the mercy of Mr. Tipton. It doesn't matter what he feels is best or what he wants, it's always what Mr. Tipton wants, and he must follow orders. So him going against Mr. Tipton's orders was the perfect way to conclude his character, and in a satisfying way that shows that, he's going to continue to succeed and live the life that he wants to live specifically. Although he does have a cameo in Jessie, where he very clearly is the manager for the Tipton Hotel again, which robs him of all of his agency in the finale, so I'm just going to pretend that he became a manager at a different luxury hotel in New York, because it helps me sleep at night. And Mrs. Tutweiller's main goal throughout the entire show was to specifically make sure London realized her true potential academically. And not even because she wants to keep her job or anything. I know I mentioned that earlier on during London's segment, but now that I think about it, she never once mentions that she's afraid of getting fired if she doesn't make sure London graduates. She's just genuinely doing it because it's something she cares about. She's very passionate about the education system, clearly. And she succeeds. She's able to reach London in a way that no other teacher has been able to do before, and it's very satisfying to watch that happen for her, and, the class gets to graduate. And then, of course, near the end of the episode, after the graduation is over, Moseby gets down on one knee and proposes to Tutweiller, and they get engaged. And the way that moment just fills me with so much joy. It makes me so happy to see that these two characters, who have kind of been their whole purpose within the show has been misery at the expense of children's enjoyment, to see children's enjoyment be derived from their own enjoyment is very satisfying in a way that a lot of other relationships and conclusions within the show were not. Especially since Mr. Moseby is definitely closing a chapter of his life in this sense, because he's no longer going to be taking care of London, and he's no longer supposed to be working for Mr. Tipton anymore. So now he can start his new life with his fiancée, and that's just really beautiful at the end of the day. And as I was writing this segment, I was kind of thinking, why do I care so much about these two being happy and being together? And I think the reason why is because I'm a grown-up now. And I find myself wanting to care about the grown-ups in this show a lot more than the children, because I can relate a lot more to the struggles of Tutweiller and Moseby than I can to the struggles of Zack and Cody or Bailey and Woody. So I think the show officially ending on a happy ending for the people who deserved it most, because they were at an actual rut in their lives. Because yes, while Zack and Cody, did have a lot of issues, to end the show with, Cody's not going to college, and Zack has been through a lot of emotional distress. But they're still young. They still have time to grow and move on from that, Versus these two characters, Moseby and Tutweiller, who have probably been through that 5 times over, and had yet to find a proper conclusion to their life, finally got that. And I just think that's beautiful at the end of the day. Although I hate Frankie as a character was introduced very late into season 3 of the show as a construction worker that's on the boat, And like, it's just the worst character, and she has so much time in the finale, and it just drains me emotionally. But I'm gonna try to ignore that. I'll admit, I bawled my eyes out when I watched the finale again for the first time. Like, I distinctly remember every single character beat when it originally aired on TV. I remember watching it, you know, as it happened, live. But for some reason, it just hit me so much more emotionally. I'm fine, I swear. I'm okay. So I think that's why I'm so passionate about this video in specific over all of the others. You know, My Babysitter's a Vampire is a show that I've cared about my entire life, and it's something I still actively care about to this day. Wizards of Waverly Place was a show that, like, got me furious, like, absolutely angry when I watched it. But this one hit me in an emotional core that I didn't think it could. And for that reason, I really enjoy it. Welcome to the outro. Again, I'm sorry my voice is back to being obsolete. I just got back from seeing 5 Sauce live. 5 Sauce video coming to the channel soon, I promise. We just keep the 2010s nostalgia flowing on this channel over here. So the main reason why this video took so long to get out is because I actually moved while making it. The reason why I said I really wanted to get this video out in June or July is because that was right before I was going to be moving, and I didn't want to have to deal with making this video while moving, but that's what ended up happening anyways. I was going to have this big dramatic like send off to the old background and have a bunch of boxes behind me and, you know, do like a connection to where like I'm going through a transition period in my life in the same way that the Martin twins were at the end of On Deck, but that just didn't happen. This video ended up becoming a lot longer than I originally planned. I mean, I should have known at the end of the day when I talked about My Babysitter's a Vampire, that video ended up being 2 hours and 30 minutes long, and it took 5 months for me to make, and this is looking to be around the exact same. But yeah, starting to work on this video in 2023 actually ended up being a blessing in disguise because I think it helped me a lot to get through all of the changes that were happening in my life. I think the reason why I ended up relating so much and enjoying watching Tutweiller and Moseby's romance really evolve throughout the show is because that was like an example of me becoming a grown-up and being more invested in their romance than like any of the teens, you know? Also like really caring about Moseby's arc from somebody who is, you know, constantly being demeaned at work to someone who gains his own autonomy. If you just pretend he's not wearing a Tipton badge in that episode of Jessie and that he just like works at a completely different hotel, then it makes everything so much better. I like the idea that he was able to escape from the abusive work relationship he had with Tipton and, you know, start anew with his new family and stuff. But yeah, this show means a lot to me, and even when like collecting clips for editing this video, I just like became so enamored and just so endeared to the entire show. There's just a certain quality about this specific sitcom to me that really, you know, kind of hits close. I also started rewatching How I Met Your Mother as a sort of way to like make sure when I was like, you know, comparing the two shows that I was doing it, you know, in good faith. And I found myself wanting to watch On Deck more than How I Met Your Mother, which is like, you know, a show for grown-ups. I just feel like there's so much to this show that, you know, doesn't get appreciated by people, probably because it's a Disney Channel show, or maybe just because it's not old enough yet. Maybe in 5 years, people will start like, you know, really obsessing over On Deck. I just feel like On Deck is a shining example of the multi-camera, laugh track, canned laughter sitcom. I feel like this show came around right as the death of sitcoms was starting to happen, which some people have talked about, but I don't think I've talked about enough. How streaming really killed the multi-camera, canned laughter sitcom, and that this show was a shining example of that. I think this is like a perfect example of a more modern example of a, you know, multi-camera sitcom. Because in my humble opinion, if you're looking for a multi-camera sitcom to represent each decade, I would say that On Deck could represent the 2010s. Like, I really would say that. Because not only is it really good, but it also explains why the multi-camera sitcom had to inevitably end. Because imagine this show existing in 2014 or 2015. It's just like impossible. 2013 is already pushing it. I feel like any Disney Channel sitcom that came after this, even though they were really good, like I'm not going to say they were bad just because I stopped being a child when they were being made. But I feel like the multi-camera sitcoms that were coming out after On Deck ended felt like they were from a bygone time. Like Disney Channel was trying to recreate something that just didn't connect with people anymore. Which is why later Disney Channel shows and now Disney Plus shows do not have this setup. A few of them do, but like, I don't know if anyone watches them. I just think the way that this show exists in pop culture is very, very fascinating, and I want people to appreciate the character dynamics and interesting like stories that they tell within this show. In general, I think character analysis regarding characters within sitcoms is wildly underdone. I mean, yeah, people talk about the Friends characters all the time, but that's because that's like the biggest show of all time. But I feel like there's a lot of discussion that could be had about character evolution within sitcoms that just isn't. So a lot of what I do on this channel is that. And of course, I do it with, TV shows that unto themselves aren't really discussed in a serious manner. So, it's kind of layers upon layers of like bullshit. If you enjoy analysis of things that usually people don't take seriously, then feel free to subscribe, because that's all I do here. I talked about Max Russo for a little under an hour in my previous Disney Channel video. I've created a playlist called the Disney Channel Saga, because trust me, I'm not done talking about Disney Channel on this channel. We're only just getting started when it comes to the behemoth that is the content they made for that network. So, if you want to keep up to date on my Disney Channel ramblings, check out that playlist. Again, my videos are coming out in order of that poll I did very, very long time ago. So next up on the discussion board is Sunny with a Chance. If anyone makes a video about Sunny with a Chance before I do, know that I had the idea 2 years ago. Don't fucking at me right now. So yeah, I really want that to be the exact next video that comes up on this channel, because I just have a lot of opinions on Sunny with a Chance. So I'm going to try to make sure that's the next video that comes out. I'm not going to make a bunch of bullshit stuff in between like I've done here today on the channel right now. Next video is going to be about Sunny with a Chance no matter what. And then, like I said, I have a lot of plans to talk about music on this channel as well. That was actually the original point of this YouTube channel, was me talking about music, but that never ended up happening. So I also have other videos in the works. But Sunny with a Chance, next. Thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate it. See you next time. Bye-bye.